took a peek at the roles.
Yeah.
So I saw that we've got a couple of shooters. We've also got Osu. Good luck with that. I have no idea what's going on for that. And then
Okay.
Smash as well.
Yeah. So Smash and Osu are a bit more on the boundary, I think, of all of them. But I think my Osu and Smash, I think, interrupting you, obviously you're the expert, but Osu and Smash, I think, are more of like, it's way more passive and it's more of just like talking while the game is happening rather than
It depends on
commentating.
what you've got. And if you've got people that know what's going on, then they can like stay clued into the match. I
Yeah.
started with Smash casting, so
Okay.
you're running 2 casters for each one, right?
So every game is two casters. Most games have one observer. I think Osu, Smash, and Rocket League do not have an observer.
Yeah, they
Um,
don't need one.
yeah, that's the thought process. Um, but everyone's got a casting duo. We're pretty keen on that because casting solos is a nightmare. I think
Yeah.
it's really hard because you don't have anyone to bounce stuff off. But yeah, sorry, I'll stop talking because that's why you're here. So yeah, everyone that's joined since this is Elixar. He's like it's like professional caster. I'm pretty sure he does a side job, right? Like you have a main job, but you pretty
My main
frequently
job is
cast.
casting, and
It
my
is your
side
main
job
job.
is also casting.
Okay, well there you go. That's even better. Um, and yeah, he's here to like give us some like some. I think so. We'll start off with like um some like kind of fundamentals. I guess is probably like good things to do, like especially for the two main roles. I think like people can default to when they're casting games is like the color casting and play by play. Some fundamentals of like how that the interaction between the two works, and for each role specifically, maybe it's a good place to start. People can ask questions after that.
All right, sounds so. Thankfully, I've just remembered that we did the talk on this a couple of. It's probably like 6 months ago on making a commentary reel. So I do actually have more notes than I intended to have. Hopefully, all of the duos, when they've spoken to each other before, will have identified whether they want to do play by play or color. Um, the main the main thing is that your play-by-play caster is going to be your host for the event. Unless there is a host that's going to be bringing in each individual game, your play-by-play caster generally is going to be your host. So they're going to be the one that's taking you to the breaks. They're going to be the one that is um, introducing the both of you, leaving some time for the color caster to introduce themselves once you've mentioned it to them. That opening for each game is going to be super important because if it goes smoothly, people are going to feel a lot more comfortable with the broadcast. So if you do talk to each other beforehand and decide whether you're just going to say their name, they can gesture to the camera, and then you move on with how things are going. Sort that out ahead of time, because if they get the impression that they're supposed to come in and say hi, but then you then barrel on, uh, and with the rest of the show, it gets a little bit muddy. And early on in the broadcast, especially, is something that you want to avoid, because it'll just the cleaner the opening, the more comfortable you'll be going into the rest of the games. Generally, obviously, for the newer casters, your play-by-play caster is the person that does the second to second, like pretty much is the one that you'll hear in most of like the sizzle reels or anything like that. The one person that is just talking as the game is going, whereas your color caster is going to be the person that does all of the like post-match breakdowns or anything like that, really. Pretty much explaining why a play happened the way it did, or for the mid game, when basically when the action isn't happening, that's really the color caster's time to really take over and dictate where the narrative of the cast is going. Obviously, you can bounce in and out from between each other, and good play-by-play usually will leave a gap for the color caster to come in, maybe explain a play or take over the play-by-play for a little bit where they feel comfortable. Some casters will say the name of their caster when they're about to cue them in. So they'll like go through a play-by-play and then sneak in the other caster's name at the end, and then they'll come flowing in to either break down a play, maybe talk about alt economy, something like that. Obviously, depending on what game you're playing. For like Overwatch, alt economy is something that the color casters frequently talk about as a like a post team fight sort of thing, or even midway through a team fight, for League of Legends or things like that. But generally, your play-by-play caster is going to be the one that's talking when the action is happening, and as things start to cool down a bit, you've got to leave time for your color caster to get time to shine. Obviously, a hybrid exists where people can do both, but it is much easier, especially if you're a newer caster or a newer duo, to decide which of you is going to be your play-by-play and which one of you is going to be your color. Obviously, color casters generally have to have that better game knowledge. So if you are feeling a little bit shaky on it, and the other person is much more comfortable with the game and its general macro play, it might be better to have them take over the color role and then you step into the play-by-play role. But game knowledge, obviously, very helpful as a play-by-play caster as well. Despite it being one of my strengths, it is very obvious when someone is completely out of their depth casting a game. So especially when you are the color caster, because the color caster is the person that's expected to be able to explain things to a new viewer. You can't always assume that everyone that comes into your audience knows what's going on. There may be someone that's watching a broadcast as their first experience for a game for the first time, and good play-by-play and color will not always assume that everyone is an expert with the game when they're coming in. At the end of the day, people become more comfortable with the game from watching people who know what they're talking about talk about it. If people do have any questions about like how to decide with whether you want to be play-by-play or color, just unmute at any time if the server permissions let you, or say something in the production chat. I'll keep an eye on it and I can answer questions pretty much as we go. Yeah, because I'm pretty much happy to do this as like an open forum. It's pretty relaxed for this. Obviously, it's a uni event, and people aren't always expecting the tip top of like tier 1 production for things. At the end of the day, you got to have fun with it and start. This will be a good time to build experience going through it.
So from that, like some key things, I guess. So I think one that I picked up, would you say like talking to your other caster at least a decent bit before you go in? Going in blind to this is probably not a good idea. So what? Speak to your other caster, like get this stuff sorted before it happens. Maybe it goes without saying, but if you have time, maybe try and like find a what's it called, like a VOD of a professional game or whatever, like whatever you want to use, and maybe like go for a game first and see like what you guys prefer. Um, and like experiment, I guess. But like I think that was like that seemed to be. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. That seems to be one of the main things you're getting at. You make sure that you're like comfortable with each other and you know what like each other's like role is, and you've got like as well for that handover thing, having a kind of telltale sign so that each of you knows when the other person is going to stop. Because I think that's something just from watching, obviously not to slate anybody because nobody here's had any like training or
I just
whatever. But
never got the same caster.
sorry.
Like, I pretty much never got the same like casting duo whenever I did anything with Newell or NSE. So always, whenever I found out what the roster was, I would like DM them the night before, say it's like, "Yo, I'll bring us in. We can do this, this, and this, and then we'll start that. I'll let you know. I'll pretty much say your name when I'm about to hand off to you, so you're always ready." And when we were doing up the spectating to make sure that we were observing at the same time, when you're doing I will use Overwatch as an example because it's one that sticks with me the most. When we were setting up our delay, we were just casting a bot game, and to make sure that the audio levels were correct, same the production this will be useful for, making sure that both the casters are at the same level or that the play-by-play is ever so slightly louder than the color caster in case they talk over each other. We would just cast over a bot game, and you got to practice a little bit of handoffs in something that was a little bit silly because Overwatch bot games, if anyone's ever watched them, are terrible. Nothing that's happening on screen will ever happen like in a real game. But it was just a good example of how we could like get a feel for how each other were gonna handle the game in a very low stake situation. Then we were ready to actually do the proper cast like 20 minutes later.
Okay, that that sounds about right. Um, anyone questions? I guess. Like obviously, I was kind of reiterating what you said. Does anyone have like any actual questions about what he said or like other things? I guess. Okay. So I was actually going to ask because uh, how is there a technique for like picking up on specific things when you're play-by-play casting? Because obviously I would have said obviously you have like the best casters, right? Like they say like they actually practice rapping, I think, before like the best ones. They rap or whatever like to warm up because they like speak really quickly. The play-by-play casters. That's a little bit undoable, I guess undoable for like the first few times you're doing it at least. Is there a good way to pick out
I
like what's good to like speak about and what not to?
One thing that, especially for games that have kill feeds, if you're watching the kill feed, you're probably slow. Generally, like it's a thing that like some newer casters will use as a crutch is to use the kill feed to kind of get an eye on the action. Sometimes you will miss stuff because your observer missed stuff, and seeing the kill feed is a good way to like keep track of kills if they're not on screen. But hopefully your color caster will be able to pick up on maybe one or two of those. But generally, if you're looking at the kill feed to see a kill, you've already missed the kill. So you want to basically go with whatever if your observer can see it, then that is what you're focusing on, because your color caster generally is going to be looking at the macro play and things like that. As a play-by-play caster, you basically just want to see what's on screen, say what's on screen, assuming that everyone else that's coming in, for example, like a radio, they can't see, assuming they can't see the action, you're giving the like minute to minute, second to second uh, breakdown of the important things, or starting to um, ease into a play as it's starting. Generally, hopefully, your color caster will give you a little bit of space as the team fight is setting up to start dictating like who the first engages are going to be and how they're getting ready for positioning to then start a play. And then hopefully from there, you should feel more comfortable going like X does this, Y does this, and following through. But also good play by play, you don't have to be hype the whole time. You generally, even if you are speaking fast or speaking even like a volume like this or slowing things down, it's important to be clear when you're talking. And then as things start to ramp up towards the end of a team fight, you can start to get more into things, start getting louder. But also having a general scope of where things are. In, for example, pools games or anything like that early on in bracket, um, you don't need to get loud for every team fight. Not every team fight matters nearly as much. There are some, especially in like Overwatch, for example, there are some fights that are pretty much like a guaranteed attack. Like Kings Row B, for example, most people just leave a crap load of space. Same goes for Nimbani. You don't really need to care too much about any team fight that happens there. You can save your energy for those end of map team fights and things like that, where things are important, things going into overtime, things like that. If the audience is used to you getting loud every single time, nothing matters anymore. But if you're talking and keeping things as the play by play, and not everything is important, once you start to get into it, the audience will get into it with you because there's now stakes, because you've established this is a more important team fight than a previous team fight.
Okay, I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Um, it sounds like really obvious when you say it out loud, but I think it's probably something that, especially because you see like when you see like all the highlights and clips of like the best like massive plays, right? There's always like the play or play cast is like borderline shouting over whatever it is because it's so hype. I think it's probably quite easy to like beeline straight for that hype, but that's actually helpful, I think.
Yeah, like good play by play doesn't have to be loud,
Yeah.
and not every play by play talker has to speak really fast. When you look at like Monty and Doa, Monty is the color caster, and he's probably one of the more charismatic of the two. Doa usually is actually quite well spoken, doesn't need to speak nearly as fast as people like Achilleos or anyone like that. That's like hitting like 130 words per minute constantly. You can, as long as your speech is clear and the key points that you're talking about are like stick with the audience, then you've done your job. You don't necessarily always need to be just yelling and rapping the whole time. Also, you will make mistakes. That's something that is also super important for a play-by-play caster. And if you take nothing out of this, you will make mistakes as a play-by-play caster, and people are less likely to notice them if you don't let them slow you down. Um, I do this like constantly with NBA. Sometimes I'll try and do quick maths in my head and I'll get it wrong. The more important thing is not necessarily, depending on how wrong it is, not necessarily correcting yourself straight away. Instead, if you cruise on with like the rest of the sentence and don't necessarily get hung up on it, next time you say something, you can, make sure that you've made the correction. You don't need to draw attention back to the mistake. You can just correct yourself on the next time that you say something. Or your color casters, they can supportively call you out on mistakes. They don't need to draw attention to the mistake. Um, but they can correct something. For example, we'll use Smash as an example here. You can have like a Smash attack that kills from center stage at like 125. If your play-by-play caster says someone's in kill percent at like maybe 95%, you as a color caster, when they kind of like hand off to you, you can start saying that they'll start trying to push towards that kill percent where something will come in. Or for example, rage in Smash is every 50%, so 50, 100, 150. If your color caster makes, if your play-by-play like makes a mistake on saying like max rage, you can then um once you've handed off, you can start talking about how they're pushing towards that max rage of 150%. And hopefully your play-by-play caster is listening to you, which is very important. Like sometimes you can get in your own head focusing on what you're going to say next. It's very important to make sure that you're having a conversation and listening to your other caster. And say if your color caster is trying to bail you out by giving the correct info, you need to make sure that, next time that you say it, that you do, casually, confidently get that correction and don't continuously make the mistake, because otherwise your color caster's in a weird situation where they have to keep correcting you, or they just have to straight up call attention to it. And ideally, your color caster shouldn't have to challenge you on something that you've said unless you're throwing it out there as a question. Sometimes throwing it out as a question for a play-by-play caster is awesome because it builds a conversation between you and the other caster, and it also brings the audience into that conversation because then they're now listening to see what your color caster has to say, and your color caster really gets to take control of the conversation, entertain as well as inform an audience, as well as inform you. When I was doing Valorant, I used to ask a lot of questions to our color caster because I still haven't played that game.
I mean, it's good. It is good because it means that, like as you said, it means that listening to the conversation, it also makes viewers think about it as well a little bit, right? Um, if there's questions and more of a back and forth rather than like speaking at each other, I guess engaging.
Yeah, and questions don't necessarily have to be stuff you don't know. Sometimes it can be like something that everybody knows, something that everyone should know, you know the answer to, they know the answer to, but you're kind of doing it for the sake of, say there's a new viewer, like for our new viewers at home is a phrase that I hear a lot in casting for like, or like for the people at home, like make it clear that like this is a question to the audience. You can know the answer to it or not, but you can make it sound like you know the answer to it and you're giving your color caster a chance to shine. It's a good way to like really build that chemistry between you two. Sometimes it feels dead air if broadcast issues happen, which
Can
they probably will.
yeah.
They probably will happen. If a broadcast goes without issues, it's a weird day. You'll be expected to just bounce off of each other. So that will be that's usually a test of just your ability to vamp. But hopefully, if you guys have been building that conversation, maybe hung out before a little bit, hopefully you'll be able to build that chemistry to just fill the dead air until we're ready to go back into things. But yeah, pretty much treating the cast as a conversation with each other and the audience is a good way to make sure that both of you get like that, not necessarily equal, because I think that most things, if they're running on time, will probably be like 70-30 in favor of the play-by-play caster talking a lot. Although I guess it does depend on different games. I don't know for League. I'm not as familiar with it. I know with Rocket League, effectively both of you are kind of play-by-play casters, and you kind of just bounce off of each other and um, leave spaces for each other to come in.
Okay. Um, should you do you have anything? So obviously, so you've said you've done a little bit of Valorant. Have you done much CS at all?
No, which is why I was surprised that I got asked to do Valorant.
Okay.
My main shooters are Overwatch. Well, my main shooter is Overwatch. I've done Valorant, and we'll probably go back to it if I was asked to, but I would have to do a whole lot of research to get back into it. Smash is where I started, um, and yeah, I've done Rocket League as well.
Okay. Um. So okay, this okay if you don't want to really say much. You're not too sure on it, but obviously, so Valorant and CS:GO have comparatively much more downtime, and it's weird. It's not straight downtime because Overwatch is obviously very on and off, right? Um, Valorant and CS can take their time a bit more to build up in a round. When there's obviously the prep time and like it's people setting up and like set positions and all that kind of thing, and it's kind of like poking at each other to kind of like wait for something to happen, I guess. Or you know what I mean, right? Do you have
Yeah.
anything more specific for those games? Because I think you said some stuff which I think is applicable to all of them, where you said specifically about like raising your voice. Um, like obviously if you are always loud, and you specifically referred it to like an Overwatch, right? Like there are some fights where it's not worth getting super hyped over or putting loads of energy into compared to ones towards the end, which obviously I understand because I've also played a huge amount of Overwatch. But would you be able to say anything more tailored to stuff like Valorant and CS:GO and Siege as well, where like rounds aren't as on and off as Overwatch, like fights aren't
Uh,
like that.
for Valorant, for me, that was where I really got good at asking questions. One, because half the time I didn't know the answer to the question. But two, it was you can start to give your color caster more time during the uh during the like buy rounds to give them time to talk about the economy that's been built up, talk about like how close we are to alts on both sides, and what um, people would, what the caster would expect to be the strategy going forward for attack. Sometimes like say they've hit B three times, like you can talk about how it hasn't been working. Now, if you were the coach for this team or you were the IGL, what would you like to see out of this team if they were looking to take a round? And then your color casting can kind of take over and start like talking about how they could approach things as they start getting in, and hopefully that conversation will take you towards the time where bodies are ready to start dropping, and they can allow you to come back in and then start talking about the action that is happening rather than the action that hypothetically could happen.
Okay, that makes sense as well. Um, and then the last thing, I mean, assuming no one still has any questions, if you want to interrupt me and ask questions, be my guest. But assuming no one else does, um, so the other thing we haven't really touched on is actually like outside the game. Like there will be, as you said, there will be dead time. There might be production issues. Is there anything you'd? I mean, I guess you kind of touched on it, but is there anything like specific topics that are really good to talk about outside the game, which you can't talk about in game because there's not enough time or whatever? Is there like, do you go more heavily into analysis, and how does the play-by-play caster, I guess, interact with that? Because obviously when you're in game, play-by-play caster, you got like the jobs are fairly cut and dry, especially for newer casters. It's cut and dry, like kind of what each person is doing. But outside of the game, like, is there a specific like routine to how the two interact, or is it more just having a conversation about what's just happened or what's about to happen?
Well, you kind of take over as a play-by-play, kind of as the host. If there's not already a dedicated host, that's basically
There will
when
be
you
no
get
host,
to
yeah.
talk about maybe the maps that are coming up, and then you can start a conversation about like how the maps are played, in terms of like what you would expect to see from agent picks, which you can also do again once the teams go in. But if you personally or production has reached out to find out the exact team rosters, maybe you can find out a little bit of information from there,
Uh-huh.
which allows you to talk about maybe the journey through bracket that the teams have had, if there's that information, or if they've said what comfort heroes or agents they picked, that allows you to start talking about those sort of things. Generally, you can explain the format is very useful. You can kind of bounce between the two of you if you want to have like one of you take over a bit of like how the map selection goes after game one, or just how the general format has been. But information about the teams, if you can collect any beforehand, is super useful for just filling time, because you can talk about like the history of the teams, if there is any, the progress through the bracket, if there is any, the group stages, anything like that. Basically, time about the tournament itself or the teams rather than the game that's coming up is usually pretty useful. So once the host has brought things in, you can then um, make sure that any new viewer that's coming in knows where we are in bracket, how this works if this is their first time watching it, and then you can start talking about what we should expect as you start getting ready to go into game, hopefully. If you have to then fill time, sometimes it is just fielding a conversation. You can have some super long pauses where you're really tested on how long you can fill time, but a lot of it is bouncing towards like the color caster if you need extra thing to talk about what you could expect if X, Y, or Z happens.
Okay, sweet. I think that's a fairly comprehensive what's it called? Like guide, I guess you're given, which is like most of it's off your own back, so not even mostly no questions. So again, last call before we end. I'm assuming you've kind of finished.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Does anyone have any like questions about anything from that at all?
I
No.
guess whilst people are sorting out
Yeah.
questions, just like the main things are, uh, there are sometimes a play-by-play caster will just get locked into talking about something. I've had rounds where I was fully planning to give over to a color caster, and then the action hits, and then you kind of just have to take charge. As a color caster, there'll be many times where you want to say something, but your play-by-play caster will not let you. And for the sake of the broadcast, sometimes you just have to hold that and wait,
Yeah.
because a muddy, like, it will get muddy, especially because even if you have your play-by-play caster or your color caster turned down in your ears, the broadcast might actually have a different audio thing, so you could be talking over each other at the same volume and it gets really messy. Sometimes as a color caster it will be annoying, but you just have to wait. As a play-by-play caster, be confident in what you're saying, because people can hear it even if it's wrong. Don't get hung up in it and just keep the broadcast rolling. And if you think there's something you're unsure about, that's where your color caster hopefully can come in, either because you asked them a question in order to like bring everyone in and get the answer, or just because you've handed off to them and they have the opportunity to do it. People can tell when a caster is uncomfortable more so than when they've made a mistake. If you make a mistake and make it obvious, then everyone knows you've made a mistake. So be confident with what you're saying, and uh, acknowledge there's another person there and have a conversation. And honestly, at this level especially, have fun with it, because it is much easier to enjoy a broadcast and do a good job if you're having fun with the broadcast you're doing. Especially at this level, there's way less stakes, so you can enjoy the commentary way more than when money is being thrown around and a gun is held to your head.
Mm. And actually, last thing as well, I'd like to add on because you said speaking like holding back and stuff. Speaking from observing as well, if there is something you want your observer to change about what they're looking at, uh, I think it's don't be afraid to just tell them, because it's
Yeah,
quite
you
hard to
can
get
actually
feedback
work
as
it
an
in.
observer, right? Like like you'll be just doing things, and obviously because you won't get immediate feedback at the very least until the end of the map, right? Sometimes not to the end of the series. So your observer won't know exactly whether you're like you like what they're doing or not. If you want them to focus on different things, like if you want them to like go to like different players, or you want to focus more on like a team or like what's happening, like maybe not mid map is probably a bad idea because you should be focusing on the cast. But at the end of the map, I think go for it. There's absolutely no reason not to like let them know how you feel
Yeah,
about what they're looking at.
whenever we get told that mics are dead, we would usually have a conversation between. Hopefully, your observer is listening to you guys
It should be.
as well. Sometimes what I do as a play-by-play caster, or sometimes the color caster, you'll mention a player, and that instinctively will get an observer to look at them. In Valorant, for example, you can see the mini map. So sometimes you can see someone's creeping around and you can feel that they're probably about to set up for something. And if your observer hasn't already caught that, you can draw attention to it on the mini map. And then hopefully your observer who's listening to you will then switch over to then see that POV, and then you can continue to like dictate the broadcast.
I can second that.
Um,
That's it's really good to just like say a name, like you said. It's really it does work.
Yeah, sometimes you get it wrong and the person that you cut to will die instantly. It happens. You kind of usually just joke about with it and continue going. Don't treat it as a mistake. It's just something to laugh at and continue rolling with. Um and yeah, as soon as you're told mics are dead, and you guys can talk, uh feedback for the observer will make your life easier, because their lives will be easier because they know what you want. Um and if you do have two monitors, I actually usually do talk to production during a match. One, I'm more comfortable with it. So if you're not comfortable with it, it is like that. But if you've handed off to a different caster, like the color caster's taking over, you can message an observer as like, I want to focus on this player because I think they're doing something or whatever. Then they hopefully can see it ahead of time as well. And pretty much the more feedback that you can give, either whilst you're talking or whilst like between games, the easier everyone's life is going forward, and an easy broadcast is a fun one usually.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, that's really good. I think we'll cut it there because I mean that's what I'm not sure how long actually. That was 30 minutes. Which actually is I think is probably a good time. Um, so again, if anyone's got anything else, say it now. Um,
Oh yeah, I've got a question.
Right.
It's for Rocket League casting. So, is it like the same thing for play-by-play and color casting, or is it possible for like both casters to be able to do both? How does it work
Yeah,
there?
Rocket League is interesting because there's not a massive amount of color to be done.
Yeah.
So pretty much you're both running the hybrid role. Sometimes you can still establish if one of you knows way more game knowledge. For me, I'm never the more experienced caster whenever we do Rocket League. So usually when it comes to explaining rotations or anything like that, that like Rocket League players should understand, but maybe someone who's new to the broadcast doesn't understand. Usually, I'll find a way to run that into the other caster. So you should still try and establish who's going to be like the host and who's going to be like the knowledge.
Okay.
But generally, kind of like a normal football cast, both of you will take play by play, but you kind of just have to. I say for Rocket League, especially because you rotate so often on who's talking, saying the name or leaving an obvious pause whilst you start setting up will make it easier for each of you to switch between each other. Obviously, don't rely on it too much because then people will start to notice. But like whilst you're starting up, whilst you're trying to find that balance of both of you being a play-by-play, using a name or any subtle cue that you've like discussed beforehand will make it much easier for you both to do play-by-play without stepping on each other's toes.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
okay, sweet. Anyone else? No, perfect. All right, we'll leave it there then. Yeah, again, like massive thank you for spending like what 30 minutes now, 35, 40
No
minutes
worries.
talking to us. I think everyone has found it like very helpful. I have as well. So yeah. Thanks for coming. I'm gonna just end the recording.